Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us in the afternoon session of Day 1 AI Diet World 2021. What a wonderful lineup of speakers we had in the morning and excellent attendee questions. Wow, that was fun. We heard from some great speakers, including Christina from IBM, and now I'm super excited to hear from Betsy, another great speaker from IBM. What do you know? IBM rocks, right? So let's give it away. Let's hear from Betsy. Let me introduce her. Betsy Gatock is Vice President of Ethics and Policy in the Chief Privacy Office for IBM. She works closely with the IBM AI Ethics Board, developing principles, practices, policies, driving the ethical development and deployment of technology. Prior to joining the CPO, Betsy was senior counsel for IBM and led legal team providing business unit support for IBM global managers, acquisitions, divestitures, IP partnerships, and other complex alliance transactions. She has provided legal support for various IBM practices and offerings, including OEM channel sales, cloud and cognitive systems, power systems, and the AIX operating system. Wow, super excited to have you, Betsy.
Oh, well, thank you, Shilpi. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here. As Shilpi said, I am Vice President of Ethics and Policy at IBM, reporting into our Chief Privacy Officer. And I'm going to start off by saying that I'm going to share a lot of examples from IBM, but the thoughts and opinions here are mine. They don't necessarily reflect the position of my employer, IBM. So if you're upset with anything I say here, you can contact me. But that said, hopefully you're able to listen to some of the speakers earlier today. And Christina Montgomery, my boss, discussed embedding trust in all that you do. And Catherine King discussed the importance of diversity and inclusion in data and analytics, which has some very nice parallels to tech ethics and creating a culture that embraces tech ethics. And then we also heard from that panel regarding the importance of whistleblowers and encouraging people to speak up. So I want to thank those speakers in the panel for laying such a great foundation here. And now I want to pull on some of the threads that were laid out in those discussions and dive deeper into how you can operationalize the policies regarding the ethical development and deployment of AI and other technologies, and strive to create a culture that not only embraces the policies, but advocates for the values behind those policies and includes the voices of the many and not the few. So first, I want to point out that many people want to put tech ethics into the same box as other regulated areas related to business ethics. I frequently hear it compared to privacy, which makes sense since we report into the CPO and there's a lot of similarities, but they'll compare it to privacy and the GDPR and all the regulations that follow GDPR. And then I've heard other people who assume tech ethics is just another flavor of behaviors to be regulated by anti-bribery and anti-corruption laws like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or Sarbanes-Oxley. In comparison to those regulated activities aren't wrong. There's a lot of parallels to be had. as we're basically talking about a specialty or subspecialty within business ethics. And we know that this is an area that will be regulated. And in fact, some industries, it already is regulated to some extent. So I'll also suggest to you that while the regulations, they're not what's going to drive a corporate culture. It's values that drive a corporate culture. And so while regulations are more about what you have to do, values are more about what you do just because you know it's the right thing. And while regulations frequently project or reflect our values, they also typically trail innovation in emerging technologies. So there's a practical side to making sure that your values influence the design and development of these new technologies, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. So while creating a values-based culture is complex, for today, I want to focus on 3 basic concepts that can help drive and determine a corporate culture. The first is this culture needs to have a strong foundation of values. Leaders can't fake their way through tech ethics. Your employees and your customers are passionate about this topic. And as noted by many of the other speakers today, leadership needs to embrace that passion. That passion-driven leadership then needs to enable the stakeholders to speak up. And really, almost anyone can be a stakeholder, but you have to give them a platform so their voices can be heard. And once they're speaking up, then the leaders need to engage in active listening and further actually listen with action. So let me try to explain why I really like these focus areas. So as I said, for a company to build a values-based approach to managing its technology offerings, the leadership must embrace and advocate for those values. It's imperative that voices from the top advocate for good tech and responsible innovation. In studying this topic of creating a culture, I looked back at some of the challenges faced by HR as they work to create corporate cultures that embrace diversity and inclusion. And again, I found several parallels. Ted Childs, who was a former vice president of global workforce diversity here at IBM, once said, "Passion is contagious, and when combined with leadership, the equation is effective." And I find this to be really true when addressing tech ethics as well. People tend to be very passionate about doing the right thing, about improving life and striving to benefit the many. They don't always agree on how to accomplish this, but they share a passion for it. Other speakers today have given you many examples of the amazing things we can accomplish with AI and other technologies. And you've also seen that people have a strong desire to avoid harm or the pitfalls that can come if we don't address innovation responsibly. Companies will lose the trust of their clients and increase the mistrust within society for these new technologies that can stifle their development and use. And I'm guessing you wouldn't be here today if you haven't at least witnessed that passion for good tech. And now you're either curious as to what it's all about, or better, you have that passion yourself. So move beyond the discussion of people in general are passionate about tech ethics and recognize that these people are your employees. They are your customers, and they are the people who will be impacted by whatever technology you are bringing to the marketplace. With that in mind, if your leadership is not embracing the principles behind the responsible and ethical use of AI, you'll have a very hard time creating a culture that also embraces those principles. And in my opinion, you'll be creating a real disadvantage for your company in the marketplace. So those leaders who do embrace the values, they need to be able to draw others into the discussion and be the catalyst that sparks discussion and convinces others to always strive for innovation that benefits the many and mitigates the harm. A topic as complex as tech ethics cannot be forced from the top alone. It involves determining what is beneficial, what is fair, and asking ourselves, are we doing the right thing? Yet you ask 10 people these questions and you're going to get 10 different answers. And answers will vary based on people's economic, social, political, religious, and geographic backgrounds. Answers will also vary based on the person's relation to the technology at issue. Are they a developer? Are they the user? Are they the seller? Are they the person who will be impacted by the result? With this many viewpoints and stakeholders, a corporation's policies and processes need to be constructed such that they encourage multi-directional, multicultural conversations. In other words, you have to empower the voices so that the conversation flows both from the top down and from the bottom up. Just as the technology is constantly evolving, so too is the need to address the ethical use of that technology. And creating the ability to have this continuous feedback and enabling the ability to adjust to changes in the environment is key to sustaining the conversations and staying abreast of what the next issue will be. So as you may have heard from Christina this morning, IBM has established an AI ethics board made up from leaders across the company. And underneath that board, we have a network of focal points, which help the board to engage with all employees. These focal points are from different business units, different corporate functions, and they're also sitting in different geographies. So we try to create as much diversity and inclusion in our board and in our focal points as we can. Equally important, several community groups formed organically within IBM to address the questions of tech ethics. These are people who made connections across IBM. They were united in their passion for ethical issues, and they end up creating real-world solutions with their crowdsourcing-like groups. And this is no small movement. It includes hundreds of employees from over 45 countries. At the same time that I'm seeing all of this passion and that spark of kind of a grassroots movement within the company, all of this networking that we've intentionally designed to create opportunities to be heard, I still also find that people sometimes fail to connect the dots, and they fail to see how they can make a difference. And that's where education and training play a critical role in opening up the doors for discussions. So similar to what our diversity inclusion team does, we spend time training IBMers on tech ethics and encouraging every employee to be an upstander and an ally, terms you may hear in the diversity and inclusion arena. But after one of these trainings, a developer who is a person of color reached out to me, and he said that he's taken all of the diversity and inclusion training that IBM offers, and he gets the need to be an upstander in the workplace, to speak out against any harassment, any bullying, any discrimination that he might see. But he then confessed to me that he really hadn't thought about it in terms of speaking out should he see an ethical issue around technology. He said, I put on my developer hat and I'm focused on solving the technical problem before me. And I don't always think to look at it in the context of fairness or bias. So this says to me that even if your company is wildly successful at enacting D&I policies, and even if you have other policies encouraging employees to speak up if they see something wrong, you have to make sure that you're going that extra step to say that it's not just about how people treat other people, but it's also about how technology will impact human life. And regardless of what your role is, we want to hear from you. So that's one example. Another conversation I had following one of these sessions is a data scientist spoke up to me after the presentation, and he said, Betsy, we're data scientists. We don't know anything about ethics. And so I asked him, I said, do you have a general sense of how to treat people fairly, of what it means to include people of different backgrounds, and what it means to show respect for people and for their privacy? And he, of course, responded yes. And so I said, well, then you do know something about ethics. And what it tells me is that people just need to know enough to enable them to ask good questions. And they need to feel confident in that knowledge. And that's what this whole effort to promote tech ethics is all about. It's about making space for people to be curious and to ask those probing questions that will really test if the technology is in fact creating a beneficial impact, and if we're effectively addressing and mitigating any risks. So that said, the question I probably get asked the most is, can we provide you with a checklist? And I always caution against the use of a checklist. A checklist implies that once you've checked off everything on the list, you're good to go. No further discussion is needed. At best, I can give you a list of considerations. I can give you a list of types of AI that frequently raise issues, and you can look at the draft EU regulation to construct a similar list. Or I can give you a list of design and implementation issues, such as, has it been tested for bias? Can you explain how it derives recommendations? Are you being transparent about the accuracy or what data has been used? But when you get to the end of these lists, I'm still going to ask you, what have we not thought of? What is unique about this particular use case that might warrant further consideration? This request for a checklist reminds me of something Ginny Rometty, who is the former CEO of IBM, has said many times. And that is, for growth to happen, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. A checklist brings you comfort. You know that feeling you get, I've completed all of the items that I need to do. But because these are emerging technologies, along with all the new possibilities come new problems that we can't easily or always anticipate. And that requires you to leave your comfort zone and to really tackle the tough questions. And what I find that resonates well with the technical communities that I work with is to tell them, I can give you a list, but it's not a checklist. It's a list that is really meant to drive your curiosity. I need you to stay curious about the full impact of the technology and the innovations you're developing. And that's something they can relate to, and that's something they can get excited about. So finally, once you get your team speaking up and actively engaging with you, you have to engage in active listening. People need to know that they've been heard. And when and where appropriate, they need to see that you will make change or take other actions that demonstrate that your policies are not just a bunch of words with no meaning. A very visible example of that was when IBM announced it opposes the use of facial recognition for mass surveillance and racial profiling. But for every big headline you see like that, there are many other smaller actions that we take in response to someone raising an issue, someone asking those good questions. And we find that it's actually pretty rare that we need to stop a project completely. It's really more about fine-tuning it and putting appropriate guardrails in place. Now, IBM has at least 10 formal avenues for somebody to speak up. And the ethics board has a route for teams to bring use cases in. But in my experience, some of the most impactful listening has come from one-on-one discussions. So every time I lead an education session, I encourage them to reach out to me directly. I invite the conversation. And that brings me back to find those passionate leaders within your company, encourage the conversation and the feedback loops, and most importantly, stay curious. So Shilpi, with that, I will turn it back to you and open up the floor for questions.
Thank you, Betsy. My camera suddenly stopped working, so I'm going to only keep you on screen. And
Shilpi, we may have lost your sound.
okay. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. But I only want you in the speaker. So, haha. That's fun. Okay, I'm going to stay here as the green screen. I don't know why this green screen suddenly decided to come. Sam, can you take over?
Yeah, sure. Hi, yeah, no problem.
Hi, Sam.
Of course. Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Betsy, fantastic talk. I'm just having a look at Q&A and just looking at the audience, see if we have any questions for you. And while Shilpi organizes her camera. Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a really important point that you made earlier. That that we need to involve a cross section of groups and stakeholders to build ethical AI and technology, and the leaders need to be on board. Definitely. Do we have any questions from the group? Let's have a look. Let's see. Okay. I think we're just waiting for a few to come through, Betsy. So just give people time. Yeah, and I mean, how do you implement? I mean, from Christina's talk earlier, she mentioned it's important to refer to IBM's Policy Lab and the work you're doing there, and that trust is important. From your perspective, how do you build trust and that cross section of individuals? And is there a formula, a winning formula that you use? People ask the chat lists, but what is the from your experience the best approach?
It's more of a matrix than I would say a winning formula, and so it really is about that two-way conversation. So you do have to have passion from the leadership at the top. I really agreed with Catherine on that talk, on her talk earlier today about diversity and inclusion, needing that you have to have buy-in from your leadership, and they have to really be the advocates.
Right.
But then you have to engage. We engage with our customers and solicit their feedback on what they're looking for and what trust means to them. We engage with our partners, people that we have joint development agreements with. We engage with universities. We engage with policymakers. So we reach out to as many people within the community, within IBM and outside IBM, and constantly invite that conversation going, because that's the only way that you can even begin to predict what may be coming, both in terms of what is coming with the technology and then what ethical issues to arise from that. And get the true feedback and then decide how to act in it. You have to be able to pivot very quickly. And if you kind of let your foot off the gas, then you're going to miss something. So yeah, it's very much about holding as many conversations as you can. And I have found those one-on-one, taking the leaders within the company who are passionate about it and putting them in opportunities to engage in one-on-one conversations with employees. With some of our senior leaders like Rob Thomas and Arvind Krishna, they have Slack channels, and employees can reach out to them directly, and it's hugely valuable to open those doors.
Right, absolutely. Oh, great. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Let's just check if we have any further questions. Just bear with us. Yeah, we have one from Susanna. Hi, Susanna. Question was, how do we encourage engineers? Let's have a quick look. I'm just going to go to our feed. Yeah, how do we encourage engineers to think beyond the technical side of a problem when it comes to approaching ethical AI?
Yeah, that's very much that example and I was surprised when I got that question from the developer that I mentioned. But you do have to do the education. So IBM has policies that we've put out for your business conduct guidelines for as long as I can remember, since I've worked at IBM, and they say report any ethical issues you may see, and here's how you can report them. And the engineers were not making the connection. They were only thinking about ethical issues of people interacting in the office. So you actually do have to go to the engineers, and of course, a lot of them get it, because that's where these grassroots communities have come up within IBM. They're inventors that are really tackling these problems. But you have to go to the engineers and say, I don't care what your budget is. I don't care what your timeline is, your deadline is. And this has to be supported by management all the way up, which it is here. And say, I want you to take off your developer hat. I want you to put on your person hat and think about, how is this technology going to impact society? I know you have a good intention when you designed it, but you really have to step away. It's kind of like how if you've written a paper and it's always best to turn it over and have somebody else do a proofread, and they catch things that you didn't catch. And I call it a 360 review. So you've come up with a technology to try and solve a problem. Now pick it up and look at it from every angle you can think of, and invite others to come in it and really explore what you might be missing. But I find you have to engage very directly with your engineers and your developers, because they put on their scientist hat and they don't always remember to look at it from that different angle.
Oh no, but that's a great point. Absolutely, I'd agree with that 100%. Often we find ourselves in our roles,
Exactly.
we're so focused on what we're doing as engineers and product managers, or within our teams and individually, that we need to get out of that and have those conversations, whether that's on collaboration platforms or in one-to-ones. Brilliant, super. We're on 25 past, so let me just see. Have you got time for just one more question? Maybe Betsy, how do you feel? How are you for time?
I'm good for time.
You good? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we have another question then. Just bear with me. Let's just see. Okay, so I think this question comes from Aaron. The question is, does IBM partner with other AI leaders in the tech industry space, and particularly in academia, and who are they? So yeah, that's another question, Betsy.
We do. We have partnerships with MIT, with Notre Dame, and with Stanford in the academic, and likely other universities.
Okay.
Many university partnerships, and those are the three that I engage with frequently. But so there may be more that I'm missing. We have signed off with the Rome Call for Ethics, so engaged with the Vatican, and the Vatican is now expanding their program out to other universities, so kind of an indirect reach out that way. Right. But then we also partner with many of our customers who are interested in similar ethical issues, and many of the partners that we sell with and create solutions with. So yeah, it's multifaceted.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right. I think if I'm just looking at the feed, do you have any more questions? I think that might be the last one. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Betsy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Very welcome. And we'll look forward to catching up with you soon. And yeah, we'll reach out to you. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Speak to you soon. Take care. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, hi, Kurt. I think Shilpi's she's just getting back online and setting up a camera again. So I'll just give her some time to do that. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. Just at the moment you have a question or you're just about to start. Exactly. Yeah. Technology can be fantastic in many ways, but at times not. Yeah. So we're just gonna give ourselves a bit of time in between the talks for Betsy and Kurt. So Kurt's talk will be starting actually, yeah, around 25 past. So we're right on time. So let's see whether we're ready to go. Kurt, how are you doing? You okay? Let's see. Hi, Kurt. I've just added you. How are you doing?
Excellent.
Good. Great to see you. So yeah, I mean, if you have your slides that you'd like to share on your screen, your side, then go ahead and get set up, and we can start when you're ready in your time.
All right.
Okay. Brilliant.
Oops. I actually specified that.
Yeah, you have the option to share, I believe. There's a little button. Yep. Okay. Hi, Shilpi. Yeah, there's oh, brilliant, there it is, fantastic. Yeah, I can see it now. Wonderful. So we'll introduce you, Kurt, and then we can get started. Okay. Okay, let me just check audio. One moment. Just one moment. I think we're there we go. Hi, Shopping.
Hi.
Hey, fantastic. We can hear you now. Okay.
No, I know, but this I'm trying to log in from another device, and it's not not the right one. So I'm still trying to figure it out, and I've rebooted my system. So,
Okay.
Kurt, please go ahead and introduce yourselves, and let's keep it going. And then we'll figure this out as soon as possible. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thank you. Thanks, Kurt.
Sam, you can take me backstage.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll do, Shopping. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. My name is Kurt Cagle. I am the managing editor for Data Science Central, part of the Tech Target Network. I talked with Shilpi about a month ago about what was going on here, specifically looking at the role of ethics and specifically talking about AI, data science, and how those essentially are affecting the way that we think about information and about the careers in information. So one of the things that I proposed to her was a talk that I've had in mind for a little while, talking about the disappearing data scientist, because I believe that this actually gives a bit of a roadmap, admittedly a very, very loose roadmap, of where I think the technology is going and where I think that ethics actually plays as part of that overall process. So can you see my screen?
Yes, just bear with me. Bear with me, Kurt. Yes, we can see your screen now. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right. So, small background, I have worked as a developer, as an information architect. Most recently, I've been working to help develop the offerings for data science, machine learning, and kind of the general overarching rubric of what we would call artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, I think that when you look at what exactly we think of with data science and data scientists, the question really kind of comes down to, well, what the heck are they? And why are they important to the overall piece? And more to the question, if you are looking at getting into the field, what does that mean? What options do you have, and how does that impact, what you should be thinking about in terms of your career developments, what you should be thinking in terms of the longer issues about how these impact not just technical fields, but even non-technical fields. So one of the things that I want to point out is that when we talk about data science, it's been around for a while. The notion that data science is this new field is something that I think that there's actually a certain degree of amnesia that occurs within the programming community and the technical community about what the history is. There are some wonderful, wonderful pieces talking about the nature of information, of data, of programming that extend all the way back into the mid 1950s and early 1960s, when a lot of the capabilities that we had for doing these kinds of processing work were barely even in their infancy. And yet the need to be able to manipulate data, the need to be able to find patterns and create models has been around for at least that long, if not longer. So in many cases, when we talk about data science, data scientists have actually been around in a number of different fields. Actuaries, who were people that were responsible for looking at demographic data, trying to determine from that not only insurance information, but also establishing policy based upon the data that they were seeing from surveys, from census data, from other similar types of information. Marketing analysts, statisticians, the whole field of sports, for example, has become much more data driven just within the last 15 years or so. But even before then, the level of skill necessary to be able to predict and to determine the future of which sports teams are going to win or which political teams are going to win, what is likely to be the future of elections and other things along those lines. Those areas were essentially in the realm of the statistician. Finally, you have analysts, and an analyst is essentially someone who analyzes, as no big surprise. But at the same time, an analyst is someone who basically is looking at data, looking at the information that they have available to them in tables, in slowly moving into the computer age, where they're essentially trying to determine not only what are the patterns that have been in place, but can we use those patterns to be able to determine the nature of the future in areas such as business, business analysts, technical analysts, the stock analysts, people who are working in research. Most researchers basically need to have some kind of background in analytics and the ability to work with statistics and the ability to work with stochastics to be able to identify how particular populations of people, of animals, of businesses essentially operate. So the notion of a data scientist has actually been around for a long time. However, or more to the point, when we talk about this, even the tools that we have for data science go back for decades. A lot of people have largely forgotten about languages like Fortran, but Fortran was really the first data science language out there. It was a language that was essentially developed for being able to handle not only basic computation, but also to be able to handle additional work that came down to processing, analyzing, determining, creating models, and so forth. That created kind of a separate arc away from the realm of business processing. If you look at the evolution of computers and computer programming languages, you find that Fortran largely kind of led itself into areas like SAS, SRSS, statistical packaging. Eventually, you had programs like MATLAB or Mathematica, both of which were essentially designed to let you take the mathematics and the statistical information, or the statistical formulae, and then utilize that to be able to produce and deduce from those models an indication about how accurate information was and how readily it could be used to determine what future actions would take place. So with that, data scientists themselves, and the term, is not all that old. In fact, if you look around, the first usage of data scientist as a term only goes back to about 2000. And it was a different usage than you had. Data science as a concept has been around forever, but the notion of basically someone that is focused purely on the data science, or purely on the data and data processing, is something that has only recently emerged, really within about 2012, 2010, 2012, or thereabouts. And for a while, it it essentially became kind of a point or a badge of honor. It was driven largely by the rise of two computer languages, the R language and Python. R was actually kind of an open source evolution of packages like SAS and SRSS, that essentially provided command line utilities to be able to generate data and to perform model generation upon that data. Python originally started as a somewhat generalized language, but by the mid 2010s, it had become, through the use of specific packages like NumPy and suddenly drawing a blank on it, but others along those lines, had increasingly become the language for statistical manipulation. To a significant extent, that is still true. And there is evidence that R has kind of been declining in response to the rise of Python as a language. Now, what I can say from that is, programming languages basically rise and fall all the time. If you look at where certain languages are strong, they tend to cluster in specific areas. Python, for instance, has become significant as kind of the tool of choice for working with data analytics, and has also, by dint of the fact that it allows you to do certain additional mathematical processing, has become critical in machine learning, which I'll get into in just a little bit. So in most of these cases, these particular tools then essentially identified the data scientist as someone who was basically an expert in these tools. Now, there's a worthwhile note here, because it does determine the nature of the evolution of these particular fields, and it's an ongoing evolution. When you see there's a distinction between a data scientist and a programmer. A data scientist is essentially someone that is creating models to be able to manipulate data, or to analyze and manipulate data, to be more precise. That analysis process differentiates them from being programmers, who are essentially building the tools to be able to make these happen. So the tool builders are essentially programmers. The tool users are largely data scientists. That is also changing somewhat as we begin to move increasingly into models where machine learning becomes prevalent. But for a lot of the purposes of distinction about what makes a data scientist, you can readily say that that data scientist is going to be someone that is using statistical based tools to be able to perform the analysis. Now, again, in addition to this, the notion that a data scientist is someone that basically is just a technical expert in these tools is something that is changing as well. So, given that, one of the key things that have evolved really within the last 3 to 4 years, although the foundations of it have been around since, again, the early 1960s, has been the rise of neural networks. And neural networks and machine learning are essentially two areas in which you are seeing the distinction arise between those people who are developing the tool sets, or those people that are basically using statistical analysis to be able to determine behavior, and those people that are essentially attempting to create models, using the models themselves to be able to handle areas such as clustering for identification purposes, or identifying local minima to be able to determine where information, or where you see the most optimal solutions for particular jobs, or in areas where you're dealing with sequential operations such as BERT, which is a natural language processing technology for text, or for speech manipulation, that effectively is a key part of working with any kind of natural language work, NLP work. So those that shift from the statistical to the neural is basically changing the distinction between these two. And you can almost say one is old school data science and the other is new school data science, and they do different things. I don't think there's any real, you can say that neither, or that one or the other is actually less important in terms of their overall impact. It's just that in one case, what you're doing is looking at it from a more of a statistical basis, whereas in the other case, you're basically using higher order mathematics, and in some cases, even nonlinear mathematics, to be able to build the models that determine behavior, and from that essentially evolve into the next generation of tools that we're working with. And these are very exciting times. I mean, when you start looking at this, you can basically identify things like image recognition, visual recognition, or video recognition, which is essentially a key component to things like driving autonomous vehicles. Any type of categorization is increasingly being done through neural networks. Natural language processing and determination of things like chatbots are also being run into that. So in some respects, the field itself is already fractured into two distinct areas. So another phenomenon that basically has occurred is that we went from individual people coming in and being hired as data scientists, usually pretty decent salaries, to the development of data science teams. And this is actually, I think, a very interesting and important phenomenon that occurs, because if you're looking for a future career in data science, you need to understand that it is increasingly something where the specializations are becoming more important than the overall term. It's kind of like saying in programming, I can call myself a programmer, but in point of fact, I happen to specialize in areas like user interface design, or back-end graph data systems. Those specializations are basically what are determining the next generation of programmers, but they're also determining the next generation of data scientists. Those include areas like data engineers, who are essentially the people that are responsible for taking the information, or for gathering the information, for processing it, for cleaning it, for putting it into forms that can then be utilized more effectively. These are not statisticians. These are basically people that are much more interested in data quality, data assurance, data provenance, data governance, but they are also people who are focused primarily on the pipeline of information through a system. Then you have the data analysts. These are the people that we would tend to think of as the model builders. They're the ones that are essentially generating the models that affect how not only the raw information comes in and is processed, but also that once they have those models in place, can be utilized to create new information to predict behaviors that in terms that are not just, okay, this is a number, but this is actually a program that is in turn driving other processes. So those analysts are increasingly becoming important as people who are building components in overall data-driven organizations. You have visualizers, and visualizers are essentially people that take data, which essentially are just constructs, and make those constructs meaningful to an audience. Visualizers are actually very important simply because we are reaching a stage now where it's very difficult to be able to take a look at the data constructs that we have and make them meaningful to the average person out there. But if you have someone who can basically turn that information into presentation, whether that's as dashboards or as other things like that, that's becoming an increasingly powerful skill. Additionally, you have areas like storyboard artists or storytellers, who are responsible for generating interpretations of that data that in turn will drive future business activity or future organizational activity. You have the programmers who are essentially building the tool sets, but they're focused primarily in this region. So anyone that is essentially working on areas like GPT-3, which is the Google's next generation quote unquote AI package for determined language processing. Those are people that are building out the tools, but they are working very closely with data teams to be able to determine what tools to work with. Finally, you are increasingly seeing the business strategist or the AI strategist who is essentially responsible for taking this information and making sure that it works well to further the overall corporate aims or goals that the data itself supports. And this is kind of important because if you don't have someone that's basically acting as an orchestrator and acting to be able to say, this is the kind of data that we need, and this is how we need to get it, this is why we need to get it, and this is what we want to do with it, then basically all of the other processes are essentially just wasting time. So you need to have someone who looks at this from a high level and say, why are we doing this? And this is additionally areas where we then get into data governance and data strategists or data ethicists. The notion that we actually have an ethicist as a position is actually one that I find vastly amusing because it means, among other things, that we now can actually employ philosophers to do meaningful work. And I'm going to get a lot of hack from anyone who happens to be a philosophy major on that. But the notion that you have to be able to look at the meaning of data and why you are gathering it, what are you going to use it for, and how do you determine that there is as minimal a bias as possible, is going to become a very key area for organizations moving forward. There has been a lot of work that's been done that, to be quite honest, is shady. When you go out and say, okay, can I use this information to affect social institutions or political institutions? Can I use it to basically change the way that people vote? Or even to suppress the way that people vote. Those are areas where you need to have someone who basically acts as the consciousness of an organization, but also is someone who understands the meaning and purpose and value of that data and why you have to be very careful gathering it. It is different from being someone that's managing privacy, although there's a lot of overlap. The data ethicist is essentially someone who is concerned about the information that is available, but is also concerned about available to the to different stakeholders, but is also concerned about, is this something that we should be doing? And this is becoming an increasingly important aspect of data science as we move forward. So finally, I think data scientists as a consequence are dispersing into the specialists, into subject matter experts, into governors and into champions. Those roles become very critical. Increasingly, there are very few roles within an organization that do not in some way or form get impacted by the utilization of data within those organizations themselves. We are all in becoming data scientists. Finally, to wrap this up, I think that the future that we're looking at, we talk a lot about AI. AI has become the buzzword, but the reality is that AI generally has only been successful in those cases where there is a significant amount of human intervention that is also involved. So increasingly, I am seeing thinkers, influencers, and those that are basically looking at the future, futurists of this particular area of technology, thinking increasingly about AI not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence. And augmented intelligence basically means that a lot of the issues that we are talking about, a lot of the capabilities that this current wave of technology provides to us give us significantly more ability than we had before. But because we have more ability, we also have more responsibility. Going back to the old Spider-Man ethic, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, that's happening. We are becoming more and more powerful in regard to our utilization of data. And we are becoming more powerful to the extent that when we talk about that utilization, we need to understand that every action that we have will have an impact upon not just ourselves or our organizations, but upon the world. And so when we get into this whole notion about data, about the role of the data scientist and about augmented intelligence and the like, we have to understand that we are now becoming increasingly responsible for the impacts that we are creating for society, for education, for various disadvantaged groups. All of these come into play for the environment. These are all issues that we need to be able to resolve effectively. So I think I may be running towards the end I'm at the end of my presentation. So I don't know how I'm doing on time, maybe a little bit late, but.
Yeah, I think we are a little over time, Kurt, and our next guest is waiting here. So do you want to wrap it up really quickly?
Yeah, I'm done. So
great presentation, Kurt, and I think you brought up some great points in terms of comparisons of how the role of the data scientist is changing and how they are becoming more from the generalists to the specialized, different areas of specialty. And so, what is your advice in terms of when people are getting into data science? Should they first start as a generalist and then get into specialization, or start with the specialization all at once?
I think that in general, it doesn't hurt to gain at least enough of an understanding about the processes of data science and machine learning and other aspects. And I don't even necessarily call it data science anymore. I think we're in the augmented intelligence realm at this point.
Yeah.
But realistically, anyone going into these fields probably needs to have at least enough of an understanding of the various different components, standards, graph theory, machine learning, neural networks, so forth and so on that make these up, that they can have a more effective ability to make a decision as they move into their career about what they want, because you can't do it all.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kurt. And I want to let the audience know that if you have more questions for Kurt, he is on LinkedIn and we have this live stream there. So tag him and he'll be able to answer any more questions that you have for him. Great points, and take advantage of his experience and wisdom. And he's the managing director of Data Science Central. He's written many books. So obviously he is the big deal here. So thank you, Kurt, for all your time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. And now on to our next guest, which is a young and dynamic speaker, Tulsi Doshi. Tulsi is the head of product for Google's responsible AI and human-centered technology organization. In this role, she leads the development of Google-wide improvements, resources, and best practices for developing more inclusive and ethical products. Tulsi has been recognized as one of the top women in AI ethics and serves as an AI ethics advisor to growing insurtech called Lemonade. She holds a BS in symbolic systems and an MS in computer science from Stanford University. Please welcome Tulsi Doshi.
Hey everyone, nice to see all of you. I guess good evening to those of you who are in the United States, and maybe good morning or afternoon to those in other places. Super excited to be here and to be chatting with you. And it was great to hear Kurt. I think so many interesting points there. So hopefully some of them will overlap with some of the things I'll be talking about today, and others will just be good fodder for more discussion. So let me share my screen. If I can, let's see here, share screen. Let's see if that works. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to assume that is yes, but someone ping the comments or the chat if you cannot see the screen.
Yeah, I've added it to the stream, so they can see it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So what I'll do, and I know we're a bit over time, so I'll try and keep this somewhat brief so we can also, and if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the comments chat, and we'll try to touch on them as well. As Shilpi mentioned, I am the head of product for responsible AI at Google, which means that I work across our product teams to think about how do we build more inclusive, more responsible, more thoughtful products. And we're talking about products that affect billions of users across the globe in many different ways. How do we think about users, creators, advertisers? How do we think about users from different communities and different backgrounds who might use products in different ways or have different use cases? And so for me, a lot of what I think about is how do we set up not just products that can build better experiences for users, but the processes such that we can continue to do this for every product that we build, every product that we launch, every time we make a change or an improvement. So today what I'll do is set a little bit of the stage and then talk about kind of 3 high-level lessons that we've learned as we've started to do this. And of course, we are still learning so much. There's still so much to do in terms of how we build more inclusive, more responsible products. So, at a high level, starting with this example, because I always think it's important to ground it in what are we really trying to do, right? Building inclusive products fundamentally is about enabling every single user to feel seen and to feel heard, right? We want every single user who visits a product or who uses an experience or who engages in an environment to feel like the experience is built and made for them. And to be able to achieve their goals and to achieve their needs in that experience. And I really love, in this new line of Barbie dolls from last year as an example of that. It's a multi-dimensional view of what it means to be fashionable, what it means to be beautiful. And while you can see that manifested in this physical product, that's an experience and a reaction we want manifested in our existing products, right? And this is not just about technology or about new products being developed. I love this tweet from 2019 because it's about a man who is wearing a Band-Aid for the first time that actually matches his skin color. And it's amazing because until I read this tweet, I didn't even realize Band-Aids were supposed to match skin color, because for me, that was never an experience I actually had. And so how many of us experience technology in a certain way without even realizing that it could work or should work better for us, right? And you develop hacks, you develop ways of engaging with technology that work for you because you have to, or you stop using it altogether because it doesn't work. So, you know, the underlying mission behind all of this is, how do we build products that evoke this sentiment in every single one of our users? And when you start getting into, you know, machine learning, as Kurt alluded to, and as others I think have throughout the day, the challenge, of course, is that the process is complex, right? We're talking about data collection, data labeling, then training. Then there's some sort of, you know, filtering or aggregation or ranking that leads to some sort of product experience. Users then see it, and then they have behavior that then informs that collection, right? So if you think about, for example, a recommender system like YouTube recommendations or ads or something else, you might have collection of data from how users engage with the product, from whether or not something matches a search query that someone types in. That data then gets labeled based on that engagement. The model is then trained. Then you have filtering or aggregation or ranking of that content. Users then see it. That behavior informs through. And at every step of this process, you can have bias enter the system, right? You can have bias enter the system in the way you collect the data. What users did you collect it from? Where did you choose to collect it from? How did you collect it? You can have bias in the way that you label that data, in the way that you train the model, in the way that the users actually see and perceive the data, in the ways that they then engage with it, which then goes back into the way that you collect the data, right? And so because human bias can enter this at any stage of the process, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to fairness, because there isn't necessarily a single place in which concerns might intervene or a single place in which you might want to make a change. This is also true when you think about other responsible concerns like safety, privacy, security, right? These concerns can enter at any part of the pipeline, and also multiple parts of the pipeline, which means that the way that they actually manifest to end users might be different, and the way we might go about it might be different. And so we've seen that in our products as well. Here are 3 examples, but there are countless of different ways you have to think about and address concerns. On the technical side, we've seen with a lot of our camera products, and especially ones that are focused on, you know, face match or entering users like the Nest Hub Max, that we want to make sure these products work across diverse skin tones. We want to make sure that no matter who you are, you can easily access your device, but also that your device is secure for you and actually protects. Based on this, well, we actually found that we had to sample more data. We had to collect more training data, and we also had to evaluate our model and improve its performance across skin tone and across perceived genders, as well as the intersection of those two, to make sure that our product truly worked in a way that we felt proud of. But that's very different from another product like Gmail Smart Reply. In the case of Gmail, we found that like we had these smart reply suggestions, right? So someone would send you an email, and then we would suggest 3 quick responses that you could just quickly respond. And someone would get an email saying, hey, did your engineer take vacation? And the answer would be, yes, she did. Or yes, he did. With the assumption that an engineer translates to being male. Now, the question is, okay, is that a modeling bias? Yes. But is the solution to make the model better? Not necessarily, right? In this case, we actually found that we weren't even comfortable with the idea of a better model, because gender is not binary. And just because you might see something more commonly, or you might be able to figure out a better or more accurate model, doesn't mean we actually want to perpetuate ideas of binary gender. And we actually decided instead that we would remove all gendered suggestions, and we would only suggest things that were more generic in their nature, because we felt like that was actually a more equitable product experience. So that's an example of a policy decision. And on the right, you see examples where we actually change things from a UX or a UI perspective. So you might be able to make the model better or make things better from a data collection or a technical standpoint. You may be able to change the policy. You may also want to see the end experience. Users very rarely interact directly with your model, right? There's some wrapper around that. There's some user experience that they're engaging with. And in the case of Google Translate, we actually found that that user experience was really what we wanted to lean into. Google Translate has long had concerns around gender bias in translations, especially between languages that are gendered and non-gendered, right? So for example, if I say, Tulsi is my friend, in English, the word friend is non-gendered. In Spanish, that would actually turn into amiga, right? Qualifying my gender. But what if we don't actually know what the gender is when the sentence is in English? And we found that often it was perpetuating gender biases and stereotypes related to professions, translating doctor to male, nurse to female. And so when we think about, okay, how do we actually make this more effective for users? Again, we could make the model better? Yeah, and make it more accurate. And that's something we actively are working on. But we also, again, realized that because gender is non-binary and also very personal, the name Tulsi could be a woman. It could also be someone who goes by a non-binary gender. It also could be someone who is male. And so in that case, how do we know how to translate this approach? So instead, we give users a choice. Here in that mock on the screen, you see that the word friend gets translated both to amigo, masculine, and amiga, feminine, allowing the user to actually decide what is the approach they want to take, what is the context that they have that maybe the model doesn't have. And the reason I'm walking you through these 3 use cases is because I want to highlight just how different the responsible AI approaches are that we took. And in 2 of the cases, these are not actually even directly affecting the end model that is being used, but affecting the way that the user engages with the model. And so when we think about how do we build responsible AI, it's about looking at that entire pipeline, starting from the beginning all the way to the end, and how we adapt throughout. So if it is so not one size fits all and so diverse in terms of the way that we can approach our products, how do we actually build that in? How do we set up a culture, if you will, of starting to build these changes into our products and into the way that we develop? And so there's 3 things that I'll lightly touch on. 1 is building a shared vocabulary. The second, lowering barriers to entry. And the third, accountability. So what do I mean by building a shared vocabulary? Well, 3 years ago, we released the AI principles, which are 7 principles of what we believe AI should do, and 4 principles of applications that we at Google would never pursue. And it's interesting because if you read these AI principles, they both provide a valuable scaffold, but are also very generic, right? So you see things like be socially beneficial. 2, avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. 3, be built and tested for safety. Be accountable to people. Incorporate privacy design principles. These Google principles don't necessarily prescribe exactly how these things should be done. But what we found that they've done is create a shared vocabulary around the organization of things that we value in our products, things that we expect to see when products go to launch, things that we want to be measuring and evaluating. And while we don't have all the answers for how to do all of these things for every single one of our products, it provides motivation for our product managers, for our engineers, for our research scientists to ensure that these are baked into that product development process. We've also found, though, that these challenges can be rough. It's not always clear what type of challenge or what type of improvement to make. And so what we've found is that we've had to be incremental and iterative to truly understand individual product needs and context. Often, we need to do foundational research. We need to work with communities to understand real user needs across different community groups. We need to understand how to think about concepts like skin tone, right? Or gender. We need to also understand technical concepts, right? How do we actually make a model more accurate for different slices of communities? So we actually think about that foundational research and then try to put it in practice into a product. And often we find that when we put the foundational research into practice and product, it doesn't work the first time. We actually have to iterate on it, make differences, make changes. Once we're actually able to land a change then in a product, then we can say, okay, how do we actually scale those insights? How do we take what we learned and turn it into something that can truly lower the barrier to entry for our organization so that more people can build off of this? Let me walk you through an example of how that actually works. So we have a bunch of classifiers across the industry at Google and across the industry at large that aim to identify things like hate, harassment, abuse, spam, right? You want to make sure that, for example, you filter out horrible content that might be offensive or extremely low quality. And so we have this classifier that we released externally called the Toxicity Classifier, the Perspective API. And what it does is it takes a sentence and it classifies the level of toxicity from a scale of 0 to 1. So if you have the sentence, "What a sweet puppy, I want to hug her forever," that gives you a score of 0.07. If you say, "You're the worst example of a puppy I've ever seen," which is a really mean thing to say to a puppy, that's a score of 0.84, right? Seems reasonable, want to be able to filter out hateful content. But what happens when that goes wrong? And here you see an example that a user uncovered. When you had the sentence, "I am straight," gave the score of 0.07. The sentence, "I am gay," got a score of 0.84. And so the question we started asking ourselves was, how do we proactively improve classifiers? How do we make sure that we evaluate our classifiers for these problems? And we also proactively improve them to ensure that these types of issues can't happen, right? That we catch them and that we prevent them from our models. And so that led us over time to do this set of work, starting with foundational research, where we actually identified a set of model training techniques that could prevent a model from learning these types of associations towards a particular group. And our research team worked on developing these techniques. We published research papers, developed metrics. Then we actually looked at our products and we said, okay, can we actually use these techniques in our products? And we tried adversarial training in a number of content classifiers across Google. And we found issues with stability. We actually realized that the approach doesn't work in all cases and that it actually affected our overall product's ability to perform. And we had to iterate on the technique and develop a new technique called the min-diff loss function, which we found was much more effective at both improving our models and maintaining overall product performance. And so then we said, okay, how do we scale this? How do we make sure that multiple classifiers across the company are leveraging these techniques, are evaluating their models, especially if there's similar use cases? Can we apply similar learnings? And so we actually developed this into a TensorFlow library. And actually, when I developed this slide, it was to be released. The library has actually now been released. And we're actually now using it in various places across the company. And of course, this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution either. There are some cases in which we don't want to use this library. And so we've also had to work very thoughtfully on guidance around when we're comfortable using this and when we want to be careful and when we don't believe it's actually the right solution. Another example is model cards. Model cards have actually taken on a larger role in the industry at broadly, thinking about transparency. How do you actually document the limitations of your model as well as their value, so that you can have an honest conversation with your team, with potential users, with academics and regulators, being able to share what works and what doesn't work so that we're having honest experiences with our models. In 2018, the first paper was published around the model cards for transparency and how to operationalize these methods for ML fairness, transparency, accountability. We then actually tried them in product. And we found out that model cards were a lot harder to build than we thought. While they were very valuable as a concept, we needed to better understand how we support teams in actually getting all of those different pieces of documentation in place. And so as we learned how to do that, as we got more clarity, we actually built the model card toolkit, which simplifies the creation of model cards. And we released that also externally and are using it internally as well to make it easier and easier to create these types of artifacts. Before I continue, I do want to touch on the comment in the chat around a shared vocabulary, which I think it's very true, right? If you have terms that are too ambiguous, you may find yourself in a place where not everyone is actually sharing the same language, right? And the same definition, and can also modify those terms to their use. And so I think one of the things that we are doing is both trying to expound with case studies what we mean by these terms, right? So when we talk about fairness, what does that actually mean? Providing color through examples and through scenarios, trying to do trainings internally to make sure that we share that language and not just the terms, but also what we intend for them to mean and what that should mean for product teams. And then working with individual product teams and organizations like YouTube or Photos or Pixel to say, okay, what does this mean for our product? How do we take these high level definitions and vocabulary and turn them into something more tangible? And that means also, throughout the life cycle, how we actually ask questions, right? We want every team to be thinking through both from starting with product definition to eventually deployment and monitoring. What are the problems we're actually trying to solve? Who is the intended user? How is the training data collected? How is the model trained? How is it tested and evaluated? How is it deployed and monitored? And what are the limitations of the model? Which goes back again to this concept of model cards and really documenting those needs. So throughout that process, that hopefully helps even continue to clarify vocabulary, right? What questions should we be asking? How do those questions map to the overall standards we're setting? The last thing I just want to touch on is this idea of accountability. We want to make sure that we lower the barrier to entry, that we think about how to partner with our product teams, that we better understand how to solve these problems. But we also need to be able to create processes that allow us to support teams and understand them. So we think about intake. How do we triage requests for review and identify the relevant AI principles? Then we look at precedents. We talk to internal experts on privacy, security, fairness. We then actually conduct evaluations, right? We evaluate metrics. We talk to external advisors as we need. We make adjustments and mitigate. And then we might approve or we might block. And based on that, we may decide new precedents and new approaches that we may take moving forward. And so this is both a combination of being proactive in setting the vocabulary and building the techniques and the approaches, and also being reactive and saying, hey, we want to improve our launches and we want to make sure they go through a diligence process of being evaluated, and where we can make thoughtful decisions about whether or not certain technology should be launched or not. But most importantly, right, throughout all of this is about how we be intentional about what we're building through every part of the product design and development process. And I did want to share this because, it's an exciting launch that we had yesterday from Google, which is the Pixel Real Tone, which is an effort kind of across the company to really build a more inclusive and more equitable camera experience. And what we found is that we had to do that in a number of different ways. We had to improve face detection performance across skin tone. We had to improve auto white balance, our auto exposure models, blurriness. And so throughout the process, this was developed in partnership with the community. And I think what we were so excited about was we pulled in a bunch of image experts who are celebrated for the kind of imagery that they do of people of color. And those individuals gave such thoughtful, actionable, engaging feedback that we were able to take that feedback and actually leverage it to make sure we were making the right improvements, to truly hammer in and hone in on where the camera was failing and how we could make that better. And the reason I give this example is not just because I think it's an exciting push forward for Google, and I'm really proud of the team who's done so much of this great work, but because I think it really shows that building this is not just about throwing on a particular model change or assigning a particular improvement, but the way you think about the process, building in the right expertise and the right individuals, making sure that you're doing the due diligence with communities and being thoughtful about where in the process those changes need to be made. So with that, I'll stop there. I know we're way over time. I apologize, Shilpi. But we've made a lot of progress, I think, hopefully as a company and as an industry, but we're just getting started. And I think there's so much work that still needs to be done to improve the culture of our companies and our communities, to make sure that more voices are included in the room so that we are making products that are thoughtfully and intentionally designed. But I am excited that if we can set up some of these processes, that we can keep sharing and building this knowledge together, that we can get to a place where more and more products are building this into their process, and we're seeing more and more products have an effect that is way more inclusive. And I'll stop there.
Loved it, Tulsi. You just nailed it. Such a great speaker. I loved your process. I love the thought process behind making a change is not easy, and to be actively involved in the design and the thought process end to end, getting all the teams involved, not working in silos, just like you said, like you talking to the product teams and talking to the design teams and the implementation teams, and it's yeah, you have to change. It has to start from the culture within, right? And I seems like from what you are sharing, Google is doing a great job with that. I mean, there's always more that you can do, but you got to start somewhere, right? So
definitely much more to do, but I think we're trying to push forward and continue learning from that for sure.
Awesome, great talk, Tulsi. And do we have any special? I know you answered the shared vocabulary question, so thank you for that. And I do not want to bring up that controversial topic right now, so we'll let that one go. And there are more comments. People are going to be engaging with you, asking questions. So Tulsi will be around, and she's on LinkedIn, and we would love to invite you to even join our community, Tulsi. We have an active, I know we talked about it, but we would love to have you. And
yes,
and
absolutely, I would love to. And you please do, if anyone has questions or wants to talk more, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect, and Shilpi will talk more. I'd love to be more part of the community. So looking forward to hopefully talking more with all of you.
Thank you, Tulsi. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, next up, we have Aruna Patam. Let me introduce her. Aruna Patam heads AI and data science practice at HCL Technologies for Asia Pacific and Middle East region based at Sydney. She has spent the last 21 plus years delivering decision support systems using artificial intelligence and machine learning. She holds a Master of Data Science and MBA. Her current focus is on how to use AI and data science at scale to solve business challenges. Apart from this, other areas she is highly passionate about are women in AI, AI ethics, responsible AI, and how AI is helping organizations meet ESG expectations. Please welcome Aruna Patam. Hi, Aruna.
Hi, Tulsi. Hello, everyone. That was a great introduction. Thanks, Tulsi. Thanks again for inviting me to this conference. I'm really honored to be part of this great lineup of speakers that you've got. And hello to everyone. Now, let me share my presentation. Just one second. Share screen. Does that, how do I see you as well simultaneously? So is that
okay? Yeah, your
now?
slide, yeah, people can see. If you want to go into present mode, Aruna.
In my slide?
In your slide, you can go to the present, yeah, that one. Yeah,
okay, all right. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see the StreamYard, but I'll just keep going. I can only see the presentation. Probably that's the way I've sort of enabled it, but that's okay. All right. So again, thanks, Shilpi, and hello, everyone. So the topic of my presentation today is role of ML ops in AI. Now we are in a facing an interesting era of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have with AI helping us to make better decisions, to enable us to work smarter. However, when we move from theory to practice, there is a lot of questions that needs to be answered, such as how do we scale AI? How do we build a better ethical and a trusted AI system that's going to be fair for all. So that is the topic that I'm going to be covering today. You will see a little bit of alignment to what Tulsi was saying. Hopefully it will be more on the lens of how ML Ops is actually going to help in addressing some of the requirements and challenges which Tulsi just went through in detail. So hopefully there is a bit of alignment there. So in order to explain this concept of how ML Ops can help in scale and build ethical and trusted AI, I just wanted to use a business use case to help iterate the concept. So let's look at credit risk management in banking. This is a space I've got many years of experience having developed and implemented models for the financial services sector. So what is credit risk? Credit risk is a probability of someone defaulting on a loan or does not comply with the obligations that he entered into an agreement. Now, credit risk is an important function for banking, and you cannot completely eliminate credit risk, but of course we can put some mitigation in place to address the some of the challenges with credit risk. Now, the scope of the presentation now is going to be, I'm going to be covering some of the AI and machine learning use cases for credit risk management. What are some of the challenges we are facing in the machine learning models and as well deployment, and how ML Ops is helping us to mitigate those challenges and scale. Quickly about the credit management stages. So when a consumer applies for a loan, banks has to make a decision whether to approve the loan or not. So banks usually use a credit scoring model to help them make this decision. Credit scoring is an important decision support system which uses credit scoring models to determine the credit worthiness of the applicant, and tells the bank whether he will be able to pay the loan or not. And this credit scoring models are built depending upon what stage it is in. During the assessment phase, credit scoring is built using the basic minimum data, so that we can quickly assess if the applicant meets the minimum requirements. Otherwise we can disapprove it or reject it. Then during the loan approval phase, we build the credit scoring models by using all the available information about the applicant, so that we can make a precise decision whether we can approve the loan or not. And subsequently, during the monitoring phase, we use credit scoring models to understand the health of the credit portfolio. How is it performing? So all of this is an end-to-end process where how credit risk scoring models are being used. Now, have a look at some of the AI use cases and machine learning use cases in credit risk management in banking. We are using machine learning models to forecast the expected loss that the bank might incur. We are using it for early warning signals. If you wanted to know if there are any delinquencies in the accounts or the payments or in the customer, we wanted to know about those very earlier on before the actual default happens. So it helps. We are having machine learning models to provide those early warning signals for us. Anomaly detection is another area where we wanted to identify any abnormal behaviors of the customer or even the payments that they are making. And of course, in the credit scorecard, we wanted to assess the initial applications, screen them, whether they're compliant with all the requirements, and also to identify the health of the credit portfolio that we are managing. So these are some of the typical use cases where machine learning has been used. And of course, there are going to be the some challenges. The AI and the machine learning models, we have challenges in building those models as well as for implementing those models in production. So some high-level challenges, the first is the bias. There's many types of biases, but the two important biases I want to highlight is the data bias and the algorithm bias. So data bias, it happens when you are using the historical data to build a model to predict an outcome. And that historical data, if it have bias, for example, traditionally, the loans, the accreditation data has got bias towards, minority, for particular minorities or women. If we've seen the loans are being rejected in those minority groups, then those bias will get propagated into the AI system, and then you will get the similar outcomes again. So that's the data bias. We need to make sure we have diverse data when we are predicting the defaulting of a loan or not. Algorithmic bias. This is a bias that can happen when the individuals or the developers who are actually building the system, they can introduce bias consciously, unconsciously, if you don't have the diverse skill sets in the team. So that's why I emphasize on diversity, women in those jobs, as well as other minority groups as well. So you need to have diverse people to build AI system without any bias. And then the next important thing, challenge, is the algorithm and the black box. These days there are more and more sophisticated algorithms are being developed, which the financial services industries are exploring, and of course they are giving us a better prediction as well, more accuracy. However, these models are quite complex in nature. It's very hard to understand why a certain outcome was made, because it's a black box. It's complex to understand. So that's another challenge. How do you trust an outcome if you don't know how it was made? One of the other major challenge is the operationalization of the models. So it's often seen that more than 80% of the models which are in the experimental phase does not go into production and deployed because of the various challenges we face when we deploy models into production. I wanted to go a little bit into the operational challenges that we have, which is quite important for machine learning. As more and more models are being developed, we need to have a robust system to deploy and maintain. So some of the challenges we see is around the deployment. So data scientists, they build the models, test it, validate it's all good, and they hand it over to the deployment team. And due to lack of proper handover and knowledge transfer, you might introduce errors or delays in the deployment. The other challenge is data changes. So in machine learning, the models change with the change in algorithmic code, the data changes, and hyperparameter changes. While the algorithmic code and hyperparameter changes are within the control of the developers, the data change is not. So we need to make sure we have similar versioning as we have for code. The other aspect that we need to take into account is the iterative nature. So machine learning models are quite experimental and iterative in nature. They do a lot of parameter tuning and feature engineering. The ML pipelines that are used, they actually use the algorithmic code and the data and hyperparameters. If any of these changes, then you have to redo the experiment and then recalculate the metrics. Testing. Machine learning needs to undergo a lot of testing. We need to test to make sure data quality is there, pre-processing validation, data validation, algorithmic validation, algorithmic fairness, etc. We need to make sure all of those different testings are being carried out. Security is another challenge. So often we see that machine learning models, they become a part of a bigger system, and the outputs are actually being fed into other applications to make decisions, and which we may or may not know, that might lead to security challenges. Monitoring is another key aspect where we need to continuously monitor the models after you have deployed to make sure that the model is behaving how it meant to. The outcomes are the same, even with the new set of data that is coming through every day, as well as make sure that the models have not deteriorated over time. So continuous monitoring is very important. Infrastructure, again, that plays a very key role with the more sophisticated algorithms are being built, we need to have the ability to scale and also have the compute power, which takes us to complex infrastructure requirement. So for example, when you're experimentation, you want to have the GPU, and then when you're going to deployment in production, you want to be able to scale dynamically. Collaboration. So often we have seen that machine learning model is part of the last stages of the project lifecycle. Often the developers are in silo building those models, and the other team members, for them it's a black box. And with not proper feedback and collaboration, it might lead to a lot of issues. So these are some of the operational challenges that machine learning models face. With more and more machine learning models we are putting into the system, we need to be able to manage these challenges better. This is where we see MLOps playing a very important role. MLOps has become a key field in AI, and it's becoming more and more popular these days. Many people are talking about it. Now, before getting into the MLOps, I just wanted to give a very high level view on what are various ops terminologies that sits there and how they differ from MLOps. They are not MLOps. So there is DevOps, which they focus around the building and maintaining the infrastructure. You have IT ops, that's around the system and network administration. Security ops is about the security of the IT systems, the data centers, and the cloud infrastructures that we have. AI ops is about using AI to automate the IT operations, incident management, resolutions, so on and so forth. Data ops, as its name suggests, it's about managing the end-to-end data management lifecycle. And ML ops, this is the fusion of machine learning, data engineering, and the operations that is required for the smooth deployment and monitoring of the models. Just quickly looking at what is MLOps. MLOps, to me, is a framework. It is the integration of people, processes, practices, and technologies so that we are able to deploy and monitor the machine learning models in production and ensure they're actually delivering the outcome they're meant to do, and also make sure they're scalable, fully governed, and provides business value. So it's the end-to-end framework which makes the MLOps very important. It covers all different aspects, frameworks, the practices, and the procedures we need to have in place. As I said, it's a fusion of machine learning in one case, data engineering, and operationalization of projects in production. So why MLOps is important? To definitely to address some of the challenges that I've previously addressed. The key three things that I wanted to highlight is mitigating risk. When you deploy models into production, there are some risks associated, and we want to make sure we mitigate them. Enterprise scaling, financial firms and almost all businesses are moving from tens and hundreds of models to thousands of models. How do we scale these models and still ensure that it is doing their producing the right outcome? And responsible AI. This aspect Tulsi really covered it very well. And MLOps actually helps by providing the frameworks, policies, and procedures to help with the responsible AI as well. Just quickly looking at three areas where MLOps is helping. One is the mitigating risk. So this is about performance monitoring and adjusting as and when needed in the machine learning models that are in production, so that they don't have any adverse business impact. Some of the risk that might be in the models when it's in production is it may not be available for a certain period of time due to system outage, downtime, whatever may the issue, or model due to the type of data that has been coming into the models. It can provide bad prediction. We need to make sure that's not the case. As time goes, with the accuracy and fairness of the models, there is a potential to decrease as well. And also, do we have the right skill sets necessary to be able to monitor these models, refine the models, and address any risks associated with the models? So these are some of the as risk areas that we need to assess and make sure we address them. And also, when we are doing the risk, there are three main areas where you need to assess the risk based on the usage of the models, whether you are using it just to as a playpen or a sandpit environment to do experimentation, or you are actually deploying the models into production. So they're actually making some decision like approving the loans and stuff. Based on the usage, you might want to have controls and governance in place, the operational process in place to address that. Risk-based approach. So what is the probability of an event occurring and what is the impact? So based on that, you might want to tighten your governance processes and operationalization process and regulations, which is another important thing. So there's a lot of, especially in the banking sector, it is highly governed and regulated by APRA. So we need to make sure any compliance that we need to have, those also are addressed when we are operationalizing the models. Enterprise scaling, as I mentioned, so these days organizations are moving from handful of models in production to tens and thousands of models, and which all have a positive impact. In order for us to have a positive impact on the business, we need to make sure we have a MLOps discipline in place. We need to be able to have the environment to scale, the ability to use model in production with high scale data, large volumes of data, as well as be able to train more and more number of models. Even if there are thousands of models, we still need to be able to train them and ensure they're actually predicting the right outcome that was meant to. So how MLOps helps, with auto scaling, we have the frameworks and process in place, the teams in place, which can help with auto scaling capabilities. Keep track of the versioning, when the number of models increases and more and more models are moving from experimentation phase to design to implementation, as well as when we are doing experiments in the design phase. So understand whether the retained models are better than the previous version. So you might want to continuously refine your models and compare your models in production to that what you have refined, and and make sure that you actually deploy the new models if you're performing better, and ensure that the model performance is not degraded in production, which we have seen before. So enterprise scaling is another key factor for machine learning in large scale, and MLOps has got frameworks and structures in place to that. The other important aspect which MLOps really helps is the responsible AI. I wouldn't go into the details of it. I guess Tulsi has really covered it very well. But two things I wanted to highlight. It is about building an ethical and a trustworthy AI system. So it not only brings the business outcome, but also it is ethical and it is it can be trusted. The two key pillars I see from an which I mentioned, the ethical side of it and the trust side of the AI. Again, Tulsi really did it well. I'm just going to skim those due to the challenge with the time as well we have. So ethical AI is around accountability. Who is accountable? The people who are building the models should be accountable for the models. Do we have an ethical committee? Do we have a centralized team who ensures that who is building the model, who is making the changes, if any adverse effects, who is accountable for those? Inclusiveness, which I've covered already. Diversity in the data, diversity in the people who are building those algorithms. Inclusiveness is very important. Reliability and safety, have we done enough testing? Can the models run in production? Have we got the security measures in place? All of this stuff need to be taken into account. And again, MLOps really has got the process to help here. trusted AI, that's around fairness. Are we excluding a particular community, gender-based, or gender or community or race, so on. So transparency. Everybody should know how the model has been built, what data has been used, how the outcome has been derived. We are able to explain the outcome to the people to whom the decision is being used, and privacy and security. We need to make sure we comply with the company's security standards, the regulations put forth by the regulation authorities, and also individual personal identifiable informations are being protected while we are using those data. Just on final couple of slides. So how is ML Ops is enabling trusted and ethical AI? So as it said here, teams must have a good ML Ops principles to practice responsible AI. And also responsible AI actually dictates a proper ML Ops strategies to be in place. So they are going hand in hand. They complement each other. Responsible AI says this is what we need to take into account, and ML Ops has got the right frameworks, principles, policies, and standards. And it looks at the end-to-end model lifecycle, starting from establishing the business objectives to deploying the models in production and tuning the models. So you've got the end-to-end framework. ML Ops helps enable that. And just a final note is, yes, we have all the processes in place, we have technologies in place, but at the end, it's the people that need to be, given more emphasis. So organizations need to train the people on the knowledge of AI, on responsible AI, what is the do's and don'ts, helping them, training them in the right tools and technologies and frameworks and models. So that's pretty much it, Shilpi. Wrapping up on. Sorry, Shilpi, you're in mute. You're in mute.
Thank you, Aruna. I was just saying that when passionate people start talking about their area of passion, then it's hard to stop. So I could see that you're so passionate about this topic. Great coverage of ML Ops. I wish we had a little more time to go over things in detail, but maybe we can have you again for like another workshop or something where you can give us more details on this. I know you are very knowledgeable and you have more to share, so maybe we can have that. But thank you so much, Aruna, for your time. I know it's like really early morning for you in Australia, and really appreciate you joining us.
Not a problem. Thanks, Shilpi, for having me. It's actually in the afternoon, so it's not too bad. Okay. It's 11:51, so it's okay. And I love to share and learn, so happy to participate in any way I can and help.
Thank you, Aruna. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Wow, that wraps up our day one of AI Diet World. Tell us what you thought of the speakers, of the content, of the discussions that we had, the panel discussion, as well as the discussions that we had on screen, in the streams, in the comments. So tell us who you like the most. And I wanted to share, there is AI Diet World is not over yet. We have a fabulous lineup of speakers for you, and it's going on. Day 2 will be starting tomorrow, bright and early at 10 a.m. And we will start with Mike Beaufort from CTO of Greenhouse. So do join us at 10 a.m. Pacific tomorrow morning for day 2 of AI Diet World. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.